He says the problem with teachers is what's a kid going to learn from someone who decided that his best option in life is to become a teacher? He reminds the other dinner guests that, it's true what they say about teachers. Those who can do, and those who can't teach. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Heil. No, sorry. My name is Taylor Molly. And Jeffrey, shut up, Jeffrey. Jeffrey got me to open up. Here's a quick poem. We're going to be talking, I think, about my invention, Metaphor Dice. Here's a poem I wrote based on the role. Happiness is a glorified trophy. Everyone thinks happiness is a glorified trophy you win for yourself. But it's more a kind of space you make, the place such things are stored, the shelf.
Boom. Boom. So for everybody that has no idea what we're doing right here, go back here, he and I am Jeffrey Heil, and this is Taylor Molly, who I had the amazing pleasure of meeting virtually about a year ago. And we had him on our podcast, Partial Credit. And I was so enthralled with the conversation. Of course, I remember because he and I discovered we are the same age. And I so clearly remember watching Def Poetry Jam when you were on it. I was watching it live. So that was like my first introduction to you. And then I've shared it since then. And then to have it come up this many years later when Donnie, who's much younger than we are, said that it inspired him to be a teacher, I'm like, wow. And then when we talked about Metaphor Dice, because it was right before he was about to, he was ending a contest using the Metaphor Dice. So I bought, and we're going to show you what they are. I bought both sets and used it with my kids. I teach in a K-12 school that serves youth impacted by homelessness. And and then the summer, I wanted to do something fun. So we did a digital media class. And I broke out the Metaphor Dice, and I was amazed to see these kids attracted to it. Even my English learners, they're like, but I don't know all the words. I said, you don't have to do all the words in English. It's about the feelings. It's about the connections. And the dice helped us do that. And so
it obliterates writer's block. As my friend Megan Falley said, Taylor, what you've invented, you realize you have literally invented writer's blocks. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to use that. Metaphor Dice. Writer's block for conquering writer's block. So you must encounter a lot of kids who, when you teach poetry, just sit there and go, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, and but as an educator, I've been teaching for going on 30 years, and as an educator, everybody's got something that they think they're not. And I think if there was a top five, two of the top five would be math and poetry. So I think what you've done with this is like you've gotten rid of the writer's block, you've gotten rid of the not, and I think you've added the I am. And just sitting there and rolling the dice, I was messed because I knew we were going to be talking this week, and I had a group of kids in my room, and I just got the dice out. And this kid is 18 years old. He's going to take the high school equivalency exam because he's missed so much school. He's been in and out of Mexico. And I just started rolling the dice, and I said, just put things together that seem interesting to you. And he just did. And he's like, I think I could do this. I'm like, I think you can too. So, I mean, it's like, those are the things that have inspired me beyond the poetry. Like I've always had to work as an educator with scaffolds, working with kids that have gaps in their education, working with kids that are second language learning, working with kids that have been incarcerated, working with kids that have, that don't have a home. And so scaffolds are so important to me. And what you've done, I think, is create a scaffold for writing. I think it's more than poetry. It's beyond poetry. It's writing, for them to get to see words and put them together in a way that they didn't think they could do.
And also just to metaphor might be one of those things that is better taught backwards rather than saying, because I learned, a metaphor is a way of making a comparison. Like, that is not the purpose of a metaphor. That ends up happening, yes, but the purpose of a metaphor is to be able to speak in a kind of a public code. I'm going to talk about this big thing that we all understand in order to help you understand this small thing. All right, it's speaking in a public code, and in the process, we end up comparing those two things. So a metaphor is a way of claiming this big concept that's hard to understand is like this little object. It compares, things and ideas to objects and stuff you can touch. And when I am sort of demonstrating the dice, I'm going to the AWP conference. By the time the Q conference happens, I think AWP will have already happened. But I'm sitting there in the expo booth, if you've ever been to one of those conferences, and there's little literary presses and MFA programs surrounding me. And I'm just trying to get to sell some dice, and I'll say, here, you want to roll a metaphor? And I'll take, although it's red, white, and blue, happiness is a glorified trophy, or you can switch it around and do the glorified trophy of happiness. When I'm creating a metaphor on the fly, I always say, all right, what do you want to write about? And I roll a bunch of reds, and they go, oh, let's write about home. And then then I roll the blues. Okay, what is home? Let me roll two blues. What is home? Is it a blessing or is it a meadow? Like, oh, I don't want to do home as a blessing. Let's do home as a meadow. And I'll go, okay, fine. But what kind of meadow? And then we roll the whites. Home is a last minute meadow. Who doesn't know what it's like to run through the last minute meadow of home?
Oh.
How do your shoes get wet in the running through the last minute meadow of home? Anyway, next question.
And again, that to me, that's why having you have this discussion live, and whenever we've talked about it, you light up. And I've been doing the teaching for so long, and it is extended to everything after our conversations, in the sense I'm thinking, okay, I've got a science teacher that's trying to explain, in the same way that I'm trying to explain poetry to kids or writing or whatever it is, harder concepts in science. Well, we can do that with metaphor. I've got a social studies teacher who is right now teaching our 12th graders economics. There's metaphors that could be drawn and making sense of that. So it's just, to me, and as you'll see later on, if you come to the session that I'm doing, beyond what Taylor and I are talking about, is then taking the written word and visualizing it. And so we've taken, to me, what I think are the two greatest things in learning, which is writing and which is visual representations of ideas and concepts and metaphors and ideas, and we can use the two and put them together in ways that are like crazy powerful.
And anytime you can turn something intellectual into something tactile, especially for struggling learners, it's a good thing.
And I was going to say, you and I on the phone the other day, you talked about, and can you tell us why this isn't an app in the year 2023?
Not. Did I tell you that story? early on, I got this idea years ago, teaching a poetry workshop. Like, gosh, I wish there were a way to just generate thousands of metaphors really quickly, some of which are good, some are funny, some are obviously wrong, and some are, whoa, just like mind-blowingly enlightening and epiphanic. So I thought, oh, it could be an app. It could be dice, but it could be an app. It could be an app of dice. Nice. And you could, so I sort of mocked up what a app would look like using just like little pictures. So I'm basically swiping through full screen shots to pre-create the experience of what an app would be like. And it could be like a roulette, no, not roulette, slot machine. You pull the thing and the,
oh yeah, 7, 7, 7.
And passion is a divided quiz. Ooh, the divide, and then you could swoop things around, the divided quiz of passion. But I also thought, but maybe it should be an app. And I went down to visit my brother and my sister-in-law, and they've got 3 sons that are 2 years apart. I mean, spaced 2 years. And I think they were 12, 10, and 8. And I brought this, my prototypes, and we were playing on the kitchen table. And my sister-in-law said, I know you're thinking about making this an app. But the world doesn't need another app. The world needs physical manipulatives for English class. And so that's what it is an app, but it became a physical set of dice first,
Which
available
is,
at
and again,
metaphordice.com. Or if you want to go to Amazon, if you order them from Amazon, they can deliver them yesterday.
yes, actually, go back in time.
Yeah.
I love that. I absolutely love that. So you have some students that you were working with this week, and we wanted to talk about some of the things that they had written from the exact same prompt that
Right.
you led off this conversation.
Right. I made a little video for you, which you're now going to edit into my video. Let's take a look at what my students did with this very same role. Happiness is a glorified trophy. And then you and I will come back and talk about it. When you and I decided last week that the demonstration roll of the dice that I was going to write a poem about was going to be Happiness is a Glorified Trophy, or the glorified trophy of happiness, I decided that I would bring that role to my weekly drop-in workshop up at Brooklyn Poets. I teach every Tuesday morning, afternoon. And so I did today, and you're going to hear them, three of the students, first Hunter, and then Savannah, and then Naomi, as they each give you their take on what they came up with.
No, the role was interesting, and I just sort of thought that, if my imagined trophy would be a shit ton of other participation trophies just welded together to be sort of this monstrosity of evidence that, you had a life, I guess. The glorified trophy of happiness is a mangled conglomeration of participation trophies welded together by the rust of tears, every day a downpour, further cementing this brass rat king as a monstrosity of time's passing. If I look closely, I can see my 7th grade basketball trophy, the hand holding a corroded basketball from the ruins, or the 9th grade choir trophy, burgeoning out like a mangled harp. All of it is simply evidence that waking up is itself a victory.
Boom.
So let's talk about the first one, which was,
let's see, that's
Hunter.
Hunter.
That was Hunter. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What I loved about Hunter, by the way, was the way he explained to you what he was thinking and what visual images he thought of.
And of course that happened after, but yeah, I get him to talk about the role, and then I put that in the beforehand. And Savannah did that as well,
I was writing this and thinking about childhood and got emotional and wrote things my parents actually said to me into this poem. Shelves. The other day, I have a shelf in my dream house where I am keeping my loves, the old ones and the ones I'm propagating. Someday, I had a house with a dream shelf where I was glorifying my trophies, the new ones and the ones I won for happiness, the ones I won for being the happiest. My parents asked me often, "How do you obey?" And I gave them back the correct answer, right away, all the way, and with a happy spirit. They shined me my golden face, golden child, golden ache, put me their happiness on display. Yesterday, I will dust my shelves. I will let my happiness be a toothpick house made up of golden intentions with permission to fall apart.
What I loved about hers was that this happiness is a glorified trophy. She said it brought to mind certain things that her parents used to say. How do you obey, right? Joyfully, quickly, and with a happy heart, That is not something my parents made me say. Hey, kids, remember, how do you obey? They were all good. They were all good in their own way.
Happiness is a glorified trophy. My participation trophy sits on my mantle, 3 tiers tall, shining so brightly in the afternoon sun, if it catches your eye, it will blind you. And how will you be happy then? Eyes glazed over, sightless, alone. And don't the sounds inside and outside your head feel raw, jarring, sharp? I want to be happy, I said when I wasn't, as if happiness is a trophy earned for going 3 consecutive days without crying. I want to be happy, but learning to inhale and exhale is the reward. I want to be happy, but don't give me a trophy. The trophy is me.
Mine was much shorter, the one I started with. And I'll tell you what I did, which is useful, is that although the dice sort of give you a starting place, they're not going to write the whole poem for you. The next line, happiness is or is not a glorified trophy, which is to say, boom, that next line is where you're going to, is the hard part. And that's part of why there's an anthology coming out. Ask me about that later. But the other thing that I've always thought about is that you could roll the greatest combination of words for a student. Go, oh, there you go. You've got happiness is a glorified trophy. What do you think about that, Jimmy? And Jimmy goes, no, it's not.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
No, it's not. That's not it. And so I wanted to make a space for, fine, if you think it's not, then write about that. Some people say happiness is a glorified trophy, but they're wrong, because what it really is. And so that's what I decided to do. Everyone thinks happiness is a glorified trophy you win for yourself. There was going to be a line right in here that I was going to say, but they are wrong. And that looks nice, like a 3-line stanza, then one in the middle, and another 3-line. But I forgot that I had this rhyme at the bottom, right? Shelf and self. So I wanted to get to that quicker. Everyone thinks happiness is a glorified trophy you win for yourself, but it's more a kind of space. And of course, if you think I considered putting of space down there, I did right before our call, but it's more a kind of space you make, the place. I think actually I like it there better, but it's more a kind of space you make, the place such things are stored, the shelf. Oh, and then I had to leave room for the title. And what would you call this? And of course, the easiest thing to call it is happiness. I'm a spoken word poet. And so to a spoken word poet, the title is not a place to be clever. The title is, you really need to title your poems exactly what everybody would think it might be. But I was also thinking.
Why is that? You just look, my mind just got blown. So tell me why.
It did? You want me to talk more about that?
Yeah, I do.
Dust on Gold is another possibility, but yes, as a if you're writing poetry for the page, the tools of the poet who writes for the page and the tools of the poet who write primarily for the stage or the ear are similar. They have similar toolbox, but they're not exactly the same. And the one thing that I, as a spoken word poet, I have to assume that everybody is going to hear my poem only once. The luxury of the poet who writes for this page is that they know that the reader can always, if they want to, reread the poem if there's something they didn't get. And of course, that should be their goal. The goal should be to finish a poem that makes somebody go, that's amazing. Let me read it again. Let me read it again and see if I got it. So if you know you have that kind of time and attention of somebody who can go back, then the title is either the last opportunity or the first opportunity to sort of twist the way you want your reader to read it. But if you're a spoken word poet, like in the poetry slam, if anybody in the audience has ever been to a poetry slam, you've got 3 minutes to do your poem with a 10-second grace period. You often don't have time to say the title. One of my most well-known poems is now called Like Lily Like Wilson. And everybody thinks, oh, it's about a girl who can't get through a sentence without saying like. I actually changed the title to Like Liam Like Wilson. So now I'm making fun of the way boys speak. It's about a kid who can't get through a sentence without saying like, but it's about so much more than that. But you might miss that upon the first hearing. So early on, when that poem was only published in a little chapbook that I'd made at Kinko's in graduate school in Kansas in the early 90s. People would come up to me and say, "Oh, does this chapbook have the poem about like Lily, like Wilson?" And I'd say, "Oh, you mean switching sides?" Because that's the most important thing to me that happens in the poem, is that the student ends up switching sides and writing about his or her research paper from the other direction. And they would always go, "No, I don't know. I want the one about Lily Wilson." And so I realized, okay, I came to graduate school to become a better poet, but I'm realizing the differences between spoken word and poetry. A spoken word poet, pretty much you need to title your poems exactly what the audience suspects they would be titled. If you want to be clever, do it in parentheses afterwards.
New York City, please give a warm deaf poetry welcome to Taylor Molly.
I'm writing the poem that'll change the world, and it's Lily Wilson at my office door. Lily Wilson, the recovering like addict. The worst I've ever seen, so like bad, that the entire 8th grade started calling her like Lily, like Wilson, until I made my classroom a like-free zone, and she could not speak for days. But when she finally did, it was to say, "Mr. Molly, this is so hard. Now I have to think before I say anything." Well, imagine that, Lily. It's for your own good, even if you don't like it. So I think I'm writing the poem that's going to change the world, and here comes like Lily, like Wilson at the office door of my place of business. She is having trouble finding sources for a paper that she is writing for me about how homosexuals shouldn't be allowed to adopt children. They all seem to argue in favor of what I thought I was against. And it took 4 years of college and 3 years of graduate school and every incidental teaching experience that I have ever had to let out only, "Well, that's a very interesting problem, Lily. But what do you propose to do about it? That's what I want to know." And the 8th grade mind is a beautiful thing. Like a newborn baby's face, you can often see it change before your very eyes. I can't believe I'm saying this, Mr. Molly, but I think I'd like to switch sides. And I want to tell her to do more than just believe it, but to enjoy it. That changing your mind is one of the best ways of figuring out whether or not you still have one. Or even that minds are like parachutes, that it doesn't matter so much what you pack them with, so long as they open at the right time. Oh God, Lily, I want to say, you make me feel like a teacher. And who could ask to feel more than that? I want to say all of this, but I manage only, "Lily, I am so impressed with you." So I finally taught somebody something, namely how to change her mind. And I learned in the process that if I ever change the world, it's going to be one 8th grader at a time. Thank you very much.
I love it. So let's take the conversation, because there's something a turn of phrase that you use that really helped me with my students. So when we talk about using metaphor dice with students, my first question to you is, how young have you gone or seen? And we know how far it goes. So how far back can we go with metaphor dice, or have you gone?
Well, if you don't, it's that, everybody has fun rolling dice.
Yes, absolutely.
A full set of metaphor dice is now 12 dice, four reds. So that's 24 different concepts, 24 adjectives, and 24 objects. You roll them together, and the number of unique pairings is going to be 24 to the 3rd power. So that one little box has over 13,000 different iterations that you could possibly roll. The great thing about the app, though, is that although they and there is an app, although it's probably not available on the App Store anymore. Although they looked like regular D6 die that you were rolling, and you swipe your finger across, and the dice roll. They looked like D6s, but they were actually querying databases that are 100 words long. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
100 times 100 times 100, which is why the app was called A Million Metaphors in Your Pocket.
I love it.
Okay, so just the sheer act of rolling dice is fun for, like, my son is in second grade.
Okay.
You and I are 57 going on 58.
Yes, we are.
And I have an 8-year-old. Are you a grandpa?
No, I am not. I'm
Okay.
fighting that. Yes.
Okay.
My daughters are 22 and 21.
Okay, good.
So,
Good. Well, those are, even you must have thought you got started late.
oh, I did get started late on everything in my life. That
Okay.
would be the name of my autobiography.
Okay, which should be. So my son can read. He almost won the readathon for the second grade, which we just finished. And so once you teach him the order, which is red, white, and blue, is one of them. Your mother is a handed down zoo. He would love that. He would love just reading that. Mommy, we just rolled daddy's metaphor dice and it said your mother is a handed down zoo. So that's a lot of fun. Getting him to then come up with the next line, which is to say, that requires a level of abstraction that I don't think he's capable of.
Yeah.
My daughter is 5. Maybe she is capable of it, but so it would be like, I think I've used the dice with 5th grade.
Mm-hmm. And that's what Donnie teaches, my podcast co-host, and I know he has used it. So I think of 4th and 5th as a different subset of humans versus K through 3. And then middle school, as we talked about on our podcast, and you've said how interesting middle school is by far.
Loved it.
A very, very unique subset.
Don't say very unique. Don't say very unique. Oh, this interview is over.
Darn it. Should I have said definitely beautiful? I am.
That's fine. That's fine.
But the phrase, which is to say, I think has scaffolded more of my kids than I could have imagined.
Yeah.
Like because like you said, to put those dice together to get interesting things. And I also think I know on the website it says you can, get stickers to change. So if you're a second grade teacher out there, or first grade teacher, you can simplify some of the terms very easily. And make it in a sense, or something that you're studying where the kids could also write poetry about it. But that to put those things together, I think is one thing, and to go, oh, that's very interesting. What's the next slide? I have no idea. But the minute you say, which is to say, I think it's a game changer for students, obviously, not poets necessarily.
It was almost, I hinted about the anthology that's coming out. Let me just bring that up.
And that is on my list.
Oh, good. You were going to ask me about it. This anthology, so this is the one sort of piece of the puzzle that was missing, is that teachers would say, my kids love the dice and it gives them a great place to start. But could we see like a collection of poems that were written using the dice? And so that was the contest. We sort of front loaded the poems for this anthology. But that anthology, which is called Poetry by Chance, was almost called Which Is to Say. Yeah, which is the alternative title to it. And there's an essay in there by one of the editors called Which Is to Say. And it's just about how useful that phrase is. Basically a way of restating in an eloquent way what I just said. In fact, all poems are essentially, whether they say it or not, poems, the act of writing a poem is an act of saying, which is to say. Let me put it this way. Yeah, absolutely. Very useful phrase. And it makes you feel like a poet. And also you could read 10 poems, and if they all said which is to say, you'd merely find that an interesting coincidence. You wouldn't say, oh, God, what is wrong with these poems? They all say which is to say.
Well, and then that's what I noticed about Hunter and the others, how the craft for them has gotten beyond that. So watching them I'm still feel like a neophyte in terms of that and writing that sort of poetry. So I'm like, where's happiness and glorified trophy? And for a few of them, it took a few lines to get to that. And I'm like, oh, okay, well played, because I'm still somewhat formulaic. And so it just, to me, personifies where we start and where we can end.
Right.
And I love.
The 101,
Absolutely.
the 101 use of the dice is to
Yeah.
make happiness is a glorified trophy. That's your title. And
Yep.
that's also your first line. Happiness is a glorified trophy, which is to say, on the shelf of my achievements, happiness is one of the ones that is gathering dust. You know,
Yeah.
but you know, Metaphor Dice 406 graduate workshop is to just use it as a throwaway metaphor halfway through. You know,
Yeah.
I never knew my father loved me, and yet drinking beer with him, raking hay that first afternoon, he handed me a beer after we were done with all of the other men. I felt like a man just hanging out with other men. As though with that beer he had given me the glorified trophy of happiness. You know, I'm just making this up off the top of my head,
No,
but it's just like, oh, you know, the goal of writing.
there it is.
What's
Yeah.
that?
There it is. It's like, to me, I was waiting for it, so it's like, there it is.
Well, that's what's fun about the Poetry by Chance, which is being published by Button, which is a fabulous publisher, and we're coming out. It's coming out in July, July 11th. Is that
Will that be advertised on the Metaphor Dice website?
Yes,
since we will be giving that out.
It should be.
Just make
Note
sure.
to
Okay.
Hey Siri, remind me to advertise Poetry by Chance on the Metaphor Dice website.
All right, perfect.
All right,
but yeah, and so the other thing that we talked about last year, and I'm sure you've said it a million times, but I think for those that haven't heard it, the origin story of the epiphany of Metaphor Dice, when you were talking to the young lady about her father, or she enrolled and didn't have it, she didn't want to write. Can you tell that story?
Before the dice existed, I used to do this as an activity. We put 20, everybody comes up with an abstract noun, an adjective, and a concrete noun, and we put them up on the board. It takes a while to remind students the difference between an abstract noun and a concrete noun, but once they do, we put them all up there, and we've got a list of 20 of each. And then you're supposed to pick one, you know, pluck one and create a metaphor. I called it build a better metaphor. And this one girl was having trouble. I went around the room and she wasn't doing anything. And I said, just pick 3. And she said, my father, broken mirror. I said, okay, is your father still alive? And she said, maybe, I don't know. And I said, okay, let's use was. My father was a broken mirror. No one would ever think you meant that literally. That is a metaphor. He's not literally a broken mirror, but he's so much like a broken mirror that you can say he was one. And then your job, insofar as any poet has a job, is to tell me how. And she said, I think I can do that. I said, okay, use the phrase, which is to say. I'll go around the room and check in 5 minutes. I came back in 5 minutes. And this is, as far as I remember, virtually word for word what she had written. My father was a broken mirror, which is to say he'd been shattered into 1,000 pieces. He was hard to handle without drawing blood. 7 years of bad luck that man was, my mother always said. I hope he maybe is dead. But even in the tiniest jagged pieces, I could still recognize my own reflection. And she said, do you think I could make that a poem? And I was like, give me that. That already is a poem. You're going to ruin it. And I left that class thinking, I've got to be able to get students like her to that point quicker.
Yeah.
I wish there were a way that you could just generate a whole lot of metaphors quickly. Well, now there is. Introducing Metaphor Dice.
Well, and I think, but that is the happenstance of having been a teacher. Like you're more than a poet. You're also a teacher, an educator, and still are, even though you're not in the classroom. And so I think that's what you've given us. You've given us something that as educators, and again, for me, having also being a man of a certain age with a mature blonde beard, that I never stopped trying to make connections for kids. And so I think that's why this has stood out to me so much. Like, 26 years into it, I'm introduced to this, and I'm as excited to pull this out as I was when I thought I had my first great lesson. And I think that's what teachers are going to get from this. And then, and we're talking about the poetry, but for me, it's like now let's visualize it, perhaps. And we could do this in multiple ways too. Teachers, I mean, like you could have somebody create a visual representation of something, and then we can look for the metaphor in it. We can roll the dice and look for the metaphor. I mean, there's so many ways and so many things we can do with this. And I see that with science. I mean, that's how we understand molecules, by comparing them to planets. I have such a memory of that. And so this is why I get so excited.
Me too.
But yeah.
I heard it's the 70th anniversary. It was just a few days ago of Watson and Crick discovering the structure of DNA. And I heard an old interview with them talking about, building the three-dimensional model of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did the paper dice that I sent you arrive?
They did arrive yesterday. I thought that was very serendipitous.
Yes. So hand those out.
I will hand those out.
And have fun with the rest of this workshop.
I am so excited. Thank you so much for joining us. And I only hope that I can do this justice in a way that honors the dice.
I'm sure you will. Stay tuned for Jeffrey's next workshop. He's going to be doing a Zoom call with Sharon Olds.
This just in.
You want to know what I make? I make kids work harder than they ever thought they could. I can make a C+ feel like a Congressional Medal of Honor, and I can make an A- feel like a slap in the face. How dare you waste my time with anything less than your very best? You want to know what I make? I make kids sit through 40 minutes of study hall in absolute silence.